Well, let's get started. Hello, and thank you everyone out there for joining us. We have our room full of panels and a moderator. My name is Augusta Morrison. I'm Sidewalk Detroit's program strategist. This program series is brought to you by Kresge Arts in Detroit and curated and produced by Sidewalk Detroit. It has been an unbelievable journey for us to be ingrained and working side by side with Detroit artists right now, and we feel honored and thankful to the artists present with us today. For today's panel, we will be diving into the theme Now Future, in which we ask artists to reflect on their experiences around them, around the world and around them as it relates to our current political and personal landscape, as well as cultural. We've asked all of the artists involved a few key questions. What is the story of Detroit artists today, and what is the future we envision? Today, we will be exploring this. We have our wonderful moderator, Desiree Cooper, a former attorney, Pulitzer Prize-nominated journalist, and community activist. Robert Jones is an inspirational storyteller and musician celebrating the history, humor, and power of American roots music. Marsha Music is an influential writer focused on the city of Detroit's music, its past, present, and future. And our last panelist is Shaun Nethercott, an award-winning Michigan-based playwright, author, and puppeteer. Thank you for being with us today. For everyone that's joining us live, feel free to comment and ask questions in the Facebook comment section throughout the panel. We'll leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for discussion. And Desiree, I'm going to hand over the mic to you to take us on an amazing journey. And I can't wait to watch. I'm going to stop my video and mute myself. So take it away.
All right. Well, thank you, Augusta. Thank you, Sidewalk Detroit and Kresge Arts in Detroit. I think there's probably no better time to have these discussions than right now, because everything, what is the future? Where are things going? None of us really know. And that kind of means that it's up for grabs. And I'm specifically honored to moderate this panel because this is the OGs. These artists here have been making waves in Detroit for decades. They are not new to the ball game. They're not new to audience building in very difficult times. They're not new to fundraising in very difficult times. And they're not new to sort of pushing back on even a political level against the forces that be. So I think we're really going to have a really good discussion. I'm so excited. So what I want to do is, just for the benefit of the audience, for us to go around and everyone describe a little bit about what you're doing now. Like, where is your forward-facing art going now? And maybe even while you say that, tell me why that this project is yours for this moment. Let's start with Shaun.
First of all, I want to say hello to everybody and how happy I am to be on this panel with three people I greatly admire, and how grateful I am to Sidewalk Detroit for bringing us all together. This has been a very inward-looking moment for me. I have been working on a series of essays, which I think will become a book called Dispatches from the Coronaverse. And really looking at how strange and bizarre this is, and I remember writing in April, when people were dying by the hundreds daily in Detroit, how shocking and appalling it was, and then living through the death of very dear friends and having to do everything virtually. And I just got done writing an essay which I am calling Stone Soup Epoch Edition, which I think speaks to the fact that we're going to have to reinvent a lot of systems through mutual benefit and payments, because we're entering a new epoch. So that's what I've been doing.
When you say Stone Soup, I think about Captain Kangaroo. I remember them reading that fairy tale. All right, so I said we were OGs. Some of y'all don't even know what we're talking about. But I do think it's really interesting, Shaun, that in this moment where everything outside of ourselves is up for grabs, you're looking inward. And I think that's
inward and outward, I have to say. I mean,
okay.
because I'm at home writing, and I'm not out in. I mean, one of the things that was bizarre to me was that as every millennial and Generation X and Y took to the streets to talk about the racial, abuse that's occurring in our culture, I was not. I am an OG, and people I know are dying, and my husband is ill, and so to watch it from afar is a very different place to be.
Absolutely.
Than,
Absolutely. How about you, Marsha? What is speaking to you now? Where is your art going now, and why in this moment?
Well, first of all, it's good to see you, Desiree, in what goes for in person today. Our situation is so different that it's all relative, just to even see you on Zoom is almost like real. So I have been writing. I am a writer, and one of the things that I am pondering is how to not follow my muse into darkness during this period. I have spent the last month since the Corona crisis writing a great deal about the crisis and writing a great deal about the passing of people whom I have known who have left us, who were stricken and succumbed to the virus. So that has been one aspect of my practice that seems to have reverberated even through this period, because now so many projects are around that writing that I did. So many interviews and projects and documentary film projects seem to be coming from that. So one of my struggles is to also follow the light and not just mire myself in my writing about my feelings about these passings. So I am
Marsha, I will say this. Yes. I hear what you're saying, and I've read your work. I feel that is not part of the role of the artist in a time of upheaval is to bear witness. And sometimes I say, but who's going to witness the witness? As we bear witness to so much horror, really, and fear and tragedy, it's our job to get it out, make it real, and have people pay attention. And you have done that. You have brought national attention to, it's not just a body count. There are human beings that we're losing day in and day out. And the national spotlight was looking at Detroit when it was the hot spot, much because of your work. And now I'm hearing you say, who's going to witness the witness? That's a heavy mantle for you to carry as an artist.
Yes, and I feel it, the heaviness acutely, and I describe it as heaviness. So it's amazing that you use that word. I describe it as the heaviness, and so I've also had to consider that in this writing. About this crisis. Just like Shaun just said, it's a whole different thing when you're actually dealing with these deaths of people that you know, and dealing with sickness of people that you know and people to whom you are close. So that's one thing, but I also have other projects. I'm always juggling a lot, which is wonderful. I am preparing for a workshop that the Kresge Arts summoned up and tapped me to a workshop that I wanted to do for artists whose art practice is expressly about Detroit. The visual artists who paint about Detroit, the sculptors who do three-dimensional expressly on the imagery of Detroit, about photographers who photograph the city. I've been wanting to do that for some time, and that they gave me that opportunity. I also wanted to be somewhat challenging on how we depict the city, the trajectory of imagery, and how it shifted over time in our depiction of Detroit. So that's one project. And I have another one that is on the horizon, just amazingly enough, with the Michigan Opera Theater, who which is in the process of preparing the Ring Cycle, a section of the Ring Cycle, Wagner's magnificent work. And so we are in the preparatory stages of me being an oracle narrator of sorts.
Wow, that's great.
Of that work with the opera. So that is a lovely thing as well.
It certainly helps to have balancing, to be able to balance a few things so that you don't sort of go too far down a rabbit hole, especially if it's taxing. Yeah.
Yes.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. And so, Robert, how is life as an artist from the fringes of the storytelling, and again, being the witness, and music? How are those converging into your vision now?
Well, I have a number of hats, I guess, that I wear. And probably primarily and more immediately, I pastor a church in Detroit. So right from the beginning, the question became, how do you have worship online? How do you have Bible class in a virtual setting? And, this pandemic has been a blessing and a curse in a weird way. It's caused us to shorten up and be more concise about some things that we used to stretch out and probably elongate unnecessarily. We found out that we have people who love us from a distance, and you get support from places that you didn't imagine was going to happen. Well, that's happening on the church front. It's also happening on the artistic front for me. You lose the immediacy of having an intimate audience, an experience, a micro experience with an audience. But in light of having to use so much media and to learn what Zoom and Skype and all these other things that I didn't even know existed, a couple years ago, theoretically, I knew they existed, but had no experience with them. All of a sudden, you get to reach out to a wider world. And now that you've got the reach, what do you do with it? So one of the things that I'm working on with my longtime friend and musical partner, Matt Watroba, is about a month BC, before COVID, we came over to Marygrove as a part of the Center for Detroit Arts and Culture. So we're coming together and trying to establish sort of a beachhead of instruction of if you want to learn how to play traditional blues, or if you want to learn how to play traditional gospel, if you want performance tips, if you want classes or workshops on how to take your story and pare it down so that it does not run on forever, but it becomes a concise thing that people can appreciate the universality of your story. And Matt and I have been working with this concept called 20 Minutes Apart, where I grew up in the inner city in Detroit, and he grew up in Plymouth. And basically, we grew up entirely different backgrounds, cultures. We share values, and those values allow us to communicate and to breach that 20 minutes that, we geographically we're 20 minutes apart. We can be who we are, come together and communicate because of shared values, and still remain who we are, which is, a really interesting concept in this time where people fight over race, over masks, over, any number of things.
What form is this 20 Minutes Apart in? Is that a storytelling project, or what is that?
We first performed it again at Marygrove as and various other places, the YMCA downtown, and also at a number of libraries and at the Arc in Ann Arbor. We originally called it a musical conversation about neighborhoods, race, and friendship, and it was funded because of a Kresge AXD grant. But since the pandemic, we are really thinking about, we're actually working on paring the concept down so that, whereas before it was talking about how two neighborhoods contrasted with each other, one, pristine, and the other one, challenged by blight, and those neighborhoods were 20 minutes apart. Now we see we are in the pandemic, and people who are literally 20 inches apart cannot cross that gulf because one person or one community says, we are not being served by the medical community. We are dying. We've got to protect those vulnerable people. The other community is saying, basically, your right to survive is trumped, pardon the pun, by my sovereignty or my independence as an American. I don't have to wear the mask to protect you. And when you really realize that those two people are not quote unquote good and evil, they're just operating from their self-interest. And somehow
never more than now has the personal been the political, right? It's like your individual choices are definitely political choices. Absolutely. In this day and age, and you're exploring that. That's amazing. So you brought it up about the virtual. I was going to ask this a little bit later, but since you brought it up, I'd like for everybody to respond a little bit to the virtual environment and how that has affected how you're doing your art, how you're reaching your audiences, how you're planning for the future. Is it a good thing or bad thing? I know it's probably a mixed bag for all of us. Shaun, I remember talking to you about this. It's been particularly tough for performing arts.
Absolutely. My artwork has always been at the intersection of art making and community building, and that's the way I've been earning my keep for 30 years now. And so my artwork depended on personal relationships in place, and so these space Zoom live things, whatever, are better than nothing, but that's all that they are. So I think, we not only have an obligation to be a witness, but we also have to start to be we always need to be visionaries. So I've been thinking a lot, like, how do we begin to do the up close and personal work that we need to do in order to live through what I'm calling the three destructions. We're in this moment right now where our social fabric is being torn apart, where the economic crisis is escalating, and we're facing an environmental crisis as well. So we're going to have a new way of doing things. So I've been thinking, well, we have to get past the immediate flare of the coronavirus so that we can actually be but now we can start to have small gatherings. And I've been wanting to figure out how those small gatherings serve to build our resilience, because I'm quite convinced that we're going to have a terrible winter. And so how do we use our art making to build resilience in our communities? And thinking a lot like what the Bog Center talks about, new work, where you're not building a living, but you're building a life. And how do we set up kind of systems of food sharing and service sharing and time banking and all those other things like that through our arts? Because it's really clear that the economic systems are not attending to our needs and not going to. Right. They're not going to. And right. With the idea of self-interest, what I call the libertarian delusion, the self-interest is the only interest. we are going to have to, as artists, be on the front line of envisioning a culture that works entirely differently, and that it operates at the level of an eco village to set up systems and interlocking systems of mutual support. Because I believe this next winter is going to be horrifying, and we have to start now to start figuring out how we're going to make it.
You know, one thing that you made me think about is, and I'm guilty of this, is when I do a Zoom or a panel or a reading, one of the things I always ask the host is how many people came? You know, I want to know how many people I'm reaching. In my mind, what I'm thinking is it as big of a room as it would have been had I been able to be in person? And trust me, I have done readings to rooms of 2 people. So, you know, it's not like I'm drawing, you know, the hordes to things, but that's what I'm comparing things to. And maybe now it's more the salon model. You know, maybe that's completely wrong about how many can we do the same thing we did in what I call the meet space. And maybe we try to make the virtual world more intimate for our art. Like, it's not, the goal is not to get 200 people to a Zoom. The goal is to get like 10 really interested people who can interact with the moment. I don't know. I didn't think about that till you said that.
And I think we can do garden parties and house parties and things like that, because we're gonna have to have that social capital. When we come out of this era, we are gonna be someplace different. Yeah. And we have to have relationships in place. And so how can we as artists be part of that relationship building? I don't think my experience has been, I find a lot of these, which is ironic, of course, because here we are on one, I find a lot of these stultifying, and I come out of them kind of depressed and overwhelmed and not energized and not ready to take action, not ready to feel. So how do we do that differently so that we've got the emotional, physical, spiritual readiness to keep our communities and our families together as we go through this period.
Marsha, are you having that same kind of reaction to our virtual, taking our art to a virtual platform?
Yeah, you know, I think it's amazing. Once again, you articulated something that's been in my head just this morning, getting out of bed. I was thinking about reviving my salon project. I have a salon project for which I was awarded through the Night Arts Challenge called Salon des Trois. And it's a salon project, a salon conversation project. And just this morning, I thought to myself, this is the time for Salon des Trois, just so that we can have small conversations, maybe even conversations that can be difficult conversations. I pride myself on being able to navigate difficult positions and disparate people, varied people. So I am looking at how we, as a writer, writers gonna write. You know, I'm gonna write. But the presentation of it is what becomes different. I just was involved in a really exciting project that was with a chamber music company called Acropolis. And they are from all parts of the country, a small quintet. And they performed the classical work of composer Jeff Scott, who is now in Oberlin College, a professor in Oberlin College. And he composed a work called, basically it's a ode to Black Bottom in Paradise Valley that he had never heard of before he came and visited the Charles Wright Museum and was astonished by finding out about this part of the city that had been virtually eradicated. And he wanted to compose a classical work in homage to that. And we presented it, and I was asked to be a part of the project. And I composed one of my epic poems for it, giving the history in rhyme of Black Bottom, Paradise Valley, and Hastings Street. And we did a montage of live musical performance, videotaped musical performance of the work, and talks like this on Zoom, all together in one package for about an hour and 15 minutes, and for 6 performances, 4 or 5 days in a row. And it was just really a lovely, lovely project, but and probably one of the first times doing such a multifaceted type of program. So I think that, you know, sometimes crises can force humanity into its next stage of development.
That's what's happening.
And I believe that is what is also happening. This is not merely the adaptation to the COVID. This is also the next stage of human development that we're compelled to walk through. Okay. Because as a practical matter, a lot of these things, even if we didn't have the COVID crisis, are simply easier to do this way. Now, even though sometimes, you know, all of these Zoom conferences and Zooms and Zoom this and that, you know, they get to me. I'll be like, y'all not gonna worry me. This is just too much sitting up in front of my screen all the time. But there's also a way that it's really a great way, particularly internationally, because we're dealing with the human family internationally now. And the ability for us to communicate this way and to talk this way with people from all over the planet.
And it has been somewhat of a leveler.
I think it's going to stand the test of time even after COVID.
Right. I mean, you couldn't afford, you know, $500 to go see Hamilton, but you could stream it live, you know, everyone could go. Or I think about how many rooms I've been in now with famous people that I'm just like, oh my God, because they're available on Zoom. I just sign up and I just listen to them talk, you know, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's amazing. So the cross-pollination is hugely possible. But Robert, what about conveying, you know, performing arts, you know, music, telling stories? Is it lost in translation?
Well, we hope not. We're gonna find out. I am getting ready to do a storytelling festival in Utah. At least it's based in Utah. You know, it'll be from my basement. But it'll be in Utah, right? And it's one of the most prestigious storytelling festivals. You know, I was really happy and proud to be invited to it, called Timpanogos. And I've been a storyteller for years now, but finally got the invitation, and they made the decision, we're not canceling, we're going to go virtual. So we will see how effective it is. One of the things about obviously doing an in-person performance is you get community, you get the immediate feedback, you get the conversation with people to and from the stage. And we're used to that. And very much like Marsha was saying, the idea of sitting in a room looking at a camera and then looking at a screen and trying not, you know, and knowing that you look over here and it looks like you're distracted and you don't care, but it's actually because, you know, your cat just jumped up on the desk or something. It's weird, but I think as we do it more, we're going to find out that there are people who are better at it than others, and there are people who can convey a sense of community better or more so than others, just like when folks transferred from the stage to radio from radio to television.
Well, let's talk about some of those leaps, because like I said at the beginning, y'all have been doing this a while. This is not your first rodeo.
Wow.
So let's talk about a little bit about Detroit as you were building your art and building your audiences, and what challenges you may have faced then compared to now. Like, what skills are translating for you that you've built all along that are serving you well in this moment? Who wants to jump in on that one?
I will.
Okay.
Because I've been thinking a lot about this back when I first came to Detroit. I'm not a native Detroiter. I came to Detroit in the 80s and moved to Detroit. And, and these guys were here then. And you all remember, Detroit was really at a nadir at that point.
Right.
There was not much functioning. The downtown, the joke we used to tell was you could shoot a cannon downtown and not hit a soul. And you could not, in the neighborhood where I lived, you could not get it was so thoroughly redlined, you couldn't get a mortgage if you had the money to pay. It just was completely redlined. People couldn't open a business. The city government was barely functioning at that point. And so yet art began to thrive. And because there was such a clear, what drew me here was the idea that this was a place where the future was being reinvented. The old ways had disappeared. And what was left standing was, in this neighborhood in Southwest Detroit where I live, was bars and churches. That was the institutions that were left. There wasn't any shopping, there wasn't much of anything, but yet art was going on and community was going on. And the way it was going on was what I called, as I referenced a little earlier, stone soup. So that, I might have an idea for a project at that point, maybe around anti-violence. And so I would connect with somebody who had a space, and I would connect with somebody who had transportation, and somebody who could access kids. And then we would all come together. Nobody had any money, but everybody had a need and everybody had a desire. And so we were able to join forces together and create events. And we would do huge events with thousands of people with budgets of less than a few $1,000s. Wow. Because it was all about social capital. And see, that's what I think is the thing that is got to be going right now, is that I think that, we're at the final stages of, capitalism, and that it's already not meeting the needs of people. We just lived through what happens when whole communities get written off and left to die. And so what are we going to do? How do we live through? So this idea that we're going to have to find ways to share resources, share knowledge, share our benefits, share our costs in a way where nobody has to do the full lift, but everybody does a bit of a lift, and together we rise. I think that is exactly the thing that we had to do in the 80s and the early 90s in Detroit, and that we've got to do on steroids now, because it's not just going to be us. It's not just going to be Detroit. It's not going to be a local adaptation. It's going to have to be a system adaptation to how do we create resources to survive. So I think that moment is where we are at a system level rather than at a local level.
Interesting. Yep. Well, I see you nodding, Robert. What's your feel?
A lot of great ideas and a lot of great insights are coming out of this conversation. I was thinking that one of the things that I find is that when I started making music, I had a lot of elders around me. I had people that I learned from, right? And as you look around, you realize that a lot of those people have passed on, or have moved on, or retired. And people look at you like you're one of the elders. It's like, when did that happen, right? But one of the great things about this idea of learning and then passing it on is that you bring a perspective that goes back. I look over in the corner and I see Marsha, and I know that her father A lot of what I do now would not be possible without Jovan Battle. So Jovan Battle recorded a man named Brother Will Hairston doing a song called Alabama Bus. It was actually one of the first raps. It was amazing, right? So if I go back and I know that there is something called the Alabama Bus, and when I'm putting together something that talks about Rosa Parks or talks about activism, if I can bring forward the fact that in 1956, rap was being born in the person of this preacher artist who was recorded by Marsha's father, and in a form that's familiar to young people today, they might simply stop just because it's proto rap. And then, bam, they get the message, hey, we didn't invent activism. And then, sort of to put a bow on that, I see a lot of angry young people. And believe me, I have a son who's 31 years old who is 300 pounds with dreads. Every day he goes to wherever he goes to, I'm as concerned about his safety as I am about more concerned about his safety, because I feel like maybe my gray hair is not as is threatening. But when I see these young people walking down the street and looking like a mob, and then I see someone like John Lewis pass, and I see the difference, the optics of that movement versus the optics of what is presented as this movement, I think, man, if you could only learn some of the lessons from John Lewis's day, where you put, you had no doubt they had to weed out the violent people. No doubt they had to weed out, they had to train to, we're going to behave in a certain way, so that when the cameras roll, you have to see that we are a nonviolent movement committed to radical change. Now we're a radical movement, and we're all over the place. We're throwing stuff. We're walking around naked. We're doing all kind of stuff that causes the message to become diluted. So as one of the elders, I think it's maybe my responsibility. I'm not going to refer to these women as elders, but as one of the elders, it's my responsibility to bring what I've learned from the past into the present, as well as to speak to present day situations.
Gotcha. I will say I'm an elder. There's too much gray for me to try to deny that. I've been very impressed by this generation. I've been part of people who have said, oh my God, when my, the people who influence me and people my age go, what's going to happen? They're not paying attention. They're all on video games and they're all gigging jobs. I think they have done quite well. And I think that they are proving that they have their own methodology. They are using technology, like we could never imagine, and they're changing the world. So I'm not ready to lecture them about they're not doing it old school. There are things I wish were different, but you know what? My butt is sitting behind closed doors, safe and not catching a virus, and they're carrying our water. Exactly. I want to give a kudos to.
And I'm not being critical of them, because I definitely understand where they're coming from. The immediacy of the situation is there. Right. However, here's the fact. The president says young people can't catch COVID, but the fact is young people can catch COVID and can bring it home, right?
Yeah.
So that I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. I'm proud. I was proud when the kids at Sandy Hook, or the kids who were protesting automated weapons, were lying down in the grass and saying enough of this, right?
Right.
And what I'm saying is that there are some lessons that we can learn from the past. I'm not saying do it old school, but there are some lessons that we can learn from the past that apply to the future. Because one of the reasons some traditions become traditions is because they work.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a big difference between presentation and reality. Like, for instance, there are groups of young people blocking foreclosure courts right now. They're blocking foreclosure codes. And it goes this references all the way back to rent strikes in the 30s.
Absolutely.
And that's not the stuff that's getting covered. So again, the media misrepresents, but the reality is quite different. And the way I see it is that the young people who are out there right now are the people who were hurt first and worst in this epoch change. And it's not just people of color, although certainly it's first and worst is always people of color in terms of being damaged. But you've got kind of modern day indentured servitude with people up to their eyeballs in debt. And you've got modern day slavery with people who are in and out and controlled by the.
But here's what I would love to just go and have this political conversation. But what I'm also noticing is how art is so meshed into this movement.
That's right.
Truly. I mean, the murals that have gone up, the music, and they're using music to calm down and to unify back. If you're listening to this beat, if you're listening to this music, you're not yelling, you're not, going off and throwing bricks. Let's get back. We're going to put on this music and bring it back. So I've been amazed at how integral, and it's not new. It's Back to the Future, right? We remember how music was integral to the civil rights movement. And how Marsha,
any movement that works, the culture is built in.
The culture, there you go. The culture is built in. And Marsha, how are you feeling about this longitudinal look at the struggles that Black artists have had in Detroit and what we learned in the past that's translating now?
Well, I feel that during the period of which Shaun had earlier spoken. She was new to the city then, and so therefore she saw the city with a certain lens. I don't see that period of time as a period of emptiness of the city or of the streets of the time, because during that period of time, there was a resurrection of the Black arts movement that took place. And I remember downtown being a place that Dale Pryor had a gallery during those years.
Yep.
Modell, the designer, had a spectacular place. There was
Paradigm Center for the Arts, if you remember.
Pardon?
Paradigm Center for the Arts.
Yes, there was
and
a great deal of arts that was going on.
Arts were thriving.
Well, I think that's what my takeaway is from that period of time. I remember when people, basically white people or suburban white people, would not come downtown. And I remember Mbad B. At that time, we just called it Dabbles. Dabbles had his art gallery and store downtown in the David Whitney building and the other buildings downtown. Dr. Cleety Taylor had a wonderful gallery downtown. So from my vantage point, it was a period of a simmering of the arts. Because for the first time, these Black gallerists were able to afford a gallery space downtown because it was emptying out from other commercial endeavors. And so you had these galleries that were burgeoning and then thriving downtown for a period of time until over a period of time, they were moved out and began to replant themselves in other areas in the communities, which is where they are now. So I come from a period of my own life as a young revolutionary and a veteran of the revolutionary movement here. And over the years, having watched this new generation grow up in this struggle the way that they are, which is extraordinary. And I remember once with all of our fighting and all of our protesting as a young person. And I remember an elder, a movement elder saying, you know, you guys are really involved in this struggle, but the time is going to come when the people who are in struggle are going to be in direct conflict with the state itself. And I never forgot that, because that's kind of what I thought we were doing. But on the other hand, we were kind of in conflict with institutions, with processes, with culture, with ritual. But what I see today with these young people is that they are in direct confrontation. And that is why their bravery is just amazing to me. Now, yeah. I wish that I heard more music. I wish that I'm only usually able to see it myself personally on live feeds. I wish there was more music. I wish there were more chants. I wish that we have been able to teach them so many of the chants that we had as young people that kept those picket lines going, right. That kept people energized.
I'm wondering if that, you know, this sort of was all night coming explosion, right? I mean, I'm wondering if that's going to be evolving, sort of bubbling up from this new culture as they go forward. I can't believe we're getting really close to time, and I gotta ask this question. Do you guys think that there is a peculiar Detroit aesthetic?
Yes.
Coming. Oh, okay. What say you, Shaun?
What I think is that, I remember tuning into this one again when I first arrived in Detroit, and I remember going to, and you guys again being the OGs that you are, remember going to Alvin's, and it was a benefit, and the benefit, you know, it had poets and musicians and artists and political people and social workers, and everybody was throwing in. And you know, in other places that I lived, in other places that I made work, the poets didn't talk to the musicians, and the musicians didn't talk to the painters, and the painters didn't talk to the people who were interested in politics. And in Detroit, there is never a separation. There is never, ever a separation between what is happening out in the streets and what is happening in the art. It is always together, and people work across genres, and people work across different forms regularly. It's just part of the anatomy here.
Interesting. Marsha, I'll let you, since I cut you off, what is there a particular Detroit, if you heard, you know, words spoken or read a book and didn't see the cover, didn't see the artist, would you start going, I wonder if this person's from Detroit? You know, is there a very particular way that Detroit artists are existing in the world?
I don't feel that. I don't feel that there's a specific Detroit aesthetic. I do feel that there's a very particular Detroit culture. So I don't believe, for example, that, say, in the visual arts, you can look at a painting and think, oh, that's from Detroit. Or you could, you know, look at a sculpture and say, that is a Detroit artist. I don't feel that. But I do feel that the culture, what Shaun just referenced, is highly collective in many ways, and interdisciplinary in many ways, and a closeness amongst artists, even in the midst of our most conflicted or contentious. You know, there's still an underlying sort of unity between artists here. So the only caveat would be musically. I do believe in something called a Detroit sound.
The Detroit what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sound.
Oh,
sound.
Detroit sounds, yeah.
I do believe that musically, the aesthetic of our building blocks of rhythm and plain spokenness, this kind of industrial plain spokenness that is a part of our cultural legacy has translated even into other genres such as hip hop and even techno, that kind of heavy rhythmic bass line, the mechanics of industrial production as it has translated into the new electronification of music.
Interesting. Robert, how about you? What do you think?
Yeah, you know, I think certainly musically, you have to take into account that Detroit was built from people moving from different parts of the country and different parts of the world and coexisting with one another, and no doubt having helped to influence one another. I agree with Marsha about the idea of the sound, of definitely there being a Detroit sound that's eclectic and driving, and you know, I think of an iconic artist like John Lee Hooker, who when everybody else was doing three chords and this regular kind of, you know, 1-4-5 progression, Hooker would stay on the one. He'd be like working in the plant, boom, da boom, da boom, da boom, and driving it home. And as far as themes are concerned, I see a certain theme of resilience that tends to run through, I think, Detroit art. We, you know, are not the sophisticates of New York. We're not like, you know, the Chicago, whatever little enclaves there are in Chicago. We're Detroit. We are the place where you come up from, wherever you come from, create your world, create your wealth, create a new life. And I think we embody that idea of folks, you know, the reason that you got that shirt on that says Detroit Snob, I think that speaks to what the Detroit aesthetic is. It's like you might low rate us, but understand that we're not going away, and we're not crushed, and we're not defeated. And in spite of what anybody else thinks Detroit is, Detroit knows what Detroit is.
And I think that there is such an ethic of making a way out of no way here. I mean, I just think people just do it in every way that nobody, and the other thing that is really part of, there's always a undernote, not only of the industrial production, but of spirituality. Spirituality is really, really present in the art making of Detroit. And that is part and parcel of this making a way out of no way, is finding a way to have faith and finding a way to have relationship and finding a way to find whatever's out there in your environment and put it together to infuse your art making and your community building.
That's right. That's right.
One thing, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. One thing you guys didn't mention is race in art. And I came to Detroit in '84, so probably around when you came, Shaun.
A little
before. Okay. And so one thing I could not believe about Detroit, and that is that race was discussed all the time.
All the time.
And Detroiters see that as sort of a problem. Like, we're talking about it and we can't get anything done, blah, blah, blah. But before I got to Detroit, nobody would bring up race in a room. Right. Nobody in a corporate environment, nobody would say, well, wait a minute, do we have any Black applicants? And it wasn't the only Black person in the room that said that. You know, a white person would say something like that. Or people are unsatisfied with the status of race. They are upset about where we have progressed and where we haven't. And so there's a constant obsession about it that I found refreshing, because I had never been to a place where people were actually grappling with it at this level and not on a subliminal level, that it was out, it was blurted, it was yelled, it was argued, it was studied, it was denied, you know, whatever, it was always going to be there. So I've appreciated the fact that Detroit artists have really pushed that, that conversation a lot and have never stopped doing it.
You know, I agree with that. That was one of the things that, you know, of course, I'm European American and from the West, where conversations about race are non-existent. But I've lived in the South and I've lived in other parts of the country, and people, it's just not talked about. And here the conversation is advanced. And sometimes it's quite painful. And there's been, you know, I've had to certainly learn the hard way more than once. And I think it's one of the things that Detroit brings to the table is there's a power and a beauty and a richness in being in a community that is 80% African American. That changes everything. It changes everything, and it brings strength to everything that happens culturally. I think.
I would say that I had occasion just recently to counter someone who talked about Detroit's Black community. And I said to the person, Detroit doesn't have a Black community. Detroit is the community. Detroit is a Black community in which other people also live. And so that alone causes for the axis of conversation to be much different, perhaps, than in other cities, in which we are in the forefront in many ways of empowerment, of grappling with issues that regard race is very, very important. So I just wanted to say that, because I think the way that Shaun just articulated that was correct when she talked about a community in which Blacks are the majority, because it's a different way of looking at it than other cities in which they're dealing with a Black community. Detroit is a place of great power, regardless even of who moves here or who runs the city. That power of African Americanness is so rich here and so deeply embedded
and so
in every aspect of life.
And
yes.
Yeah, then that's the other
absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point that you raised, Desiree. It's a part of our conversation, to the point that that's why it didn't come up, because it's just a part of life.
Well, exactly. I mean, you talked about when Shaun comes in, she came in with different eyes, as did I, you know, and that was just huge. Where if you're born and raised and don't travel too far out of Detroit, you really don't realize. You said it's an advanced conversation that Detroiters are having, because we've been at this a long time and we haven't shied away from it. Yes. I'm not saying that we fixed it, but we've been talking about it above board for a very long time. It's 2:00. I just cannot believe it's unfair that they tried to make us do this in 1 hour. Not fair. But the OGs will come back and we'll explore more if we are invited. I want to thank you guys, Shaun, Marsha, and Robert. You guys were just extraordinary. Keep up the hard work in the community.
All right.
And I want to just remind people that are listening in on Facebook that the panel has been recorded, and you can find this recording on Sidewalk Detroit's website soon. And of course, we want to thank Kresge Arts in Detroit and Sidewalk Detroit for putting on this panel. And you guys just keep looking back for the Now Future logo, and there's going to be more discussions in this series. So come back and join us, and let's make sure we're building that community virtually and giving each other a virtual hug. Love Detroit, love you guys, and thank you so much for coming today.
All right, wonderful.
Good job, Deb.
All right.
Good job. Nice to see you all. Wish you could do it in person.
I know. All righty.